everyone, welcome back to Anxiety App. My name's Gypsy. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram if you're not already doing so, and subscribe if you feel like doing that. Are you someone who is suffering from depression and or anxiety, but is possibly hiding it? This is something that I actually struggled with for a huge chunk of my life, and I didn't realize I was doing it until years after getting officially diagnosed with major depressive disorder as well as generalized anxiety disorder. In realizing that I've been hiding it for a long time, I realized how unhealthy that was and how much it makes your depression worse when you're hiding it, also triggering the anxiety part of things that maybe wasn't there initially, but you may end up developing because of the depression just becoming too much to deal with. So I do want to go over some of the things that I was doing personally that maybe some of you guys can relate to, or if it just sounds anything like maybe you have the same intentions, like why I was hiding things the way that I was. If you feel like you might have those same kinds of intentions in your behaviors, then maybe this would be a good starting point for you to evaluate yourself a little bit further and figure out if you need to do more research or pursue some type of professional help at this stage. So I hope this video helps, and if it does, make sure to like this video, drop a comment if you would like to discuss anything or if you have any questions. I was actually diagnosed with depression unofficially when I was still in high school. I had a guidance counselor who was asking me about my symptoms because I had missed so many days of school when I was in high school. And this was in around 12th grade. I also had a flare-up of lymph nodes in my neck that was really bothering me for days and days and days. And my church that I went to at that time, a lot of our congregation members were doctors. Surprise, surprise, it was a Korean church. So, of course, stereotypically, we had a bunch of doctors that went to our church, and one of our elders there, he offered to kind of like give me a look over. And once he did and asked some questions, he told me without any hesitation that he believed that I had depression. I kind of laughed it off because I felt like I'm not sad. Like I don't have a reason to be sad. So why would you think that I have depression? But I didn't understand what depression was as a medical diagnosis. I only knew that depression, like the way people talk about it loosely, just in conversation, like, oh, I feel depressed because something really bad happened to them or they're very sad and it's like short-lived and then they get over it. So I didn't really understand what it was, so I didn't take him that serious. So this is how I first kind of got introduced to the whole concept of depression as a disorder, but I didn't understand it and I had no experience with any of it. And I didn't ask him questions further than just kind of like laughing it off because I didn't want him to explain to me all the reasons why he thought that I had depression and then kind of like label me. So I just kind of was like, thanks, and then just laughed it off. But then later, when I started to have these bouts of missing school, what I would do was I would just lay in my bed for hours and hours and hours, and I would not wake up when it was time to go to school in the morning. I also had really bad insomnia, so I wouldn't sleep at night, which doesn't help when you have to wake up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school. Just when I was finally rolling out of bed and appearing at school, it was like the school day was almost over. It would be like 1 p.m., 2 p.m., like around then, and I would go to maybe like 1 or 2 classes. So I missed a lot of school because of that. And my teachers were getting concerned, and my guidance counselor was asking me some questions, and then she recommended that I go and see a psychologist or a therapist or something. So I started going to see that person just to appease my counselor. I didn't want her to feel like sure I wasn't taking her job serious, I guess, because we had a really good relationship. But that counselor also told me that she felt that I had depression, and I didn't agree. I didn't know what she was talking about. I don't know why she felt that I did, but I went there every week and like would tell her my story or whatever. I feel like from that point on, depression was like on the radar for me, but I didn't really understand it. So just now that I do understand a lot more, when I look back, I can see the things that I was doing to hide the depression, hide the anxiety, because I didn't want people to worry about me or think that something was wrong with me. but something was really, really wrong with me. And some of the things I would do is I would pretend, this is like the biggest thing I would do. I would pretend that I was always in a good mood. So when I would be around people outside of my household, I was constantly doing things to make them feel that I was happy, that I didn't have any negative emotions. Of course, I talked about stuff that was negative, but when I would talk about negative things, this is the other thing I would do. I would mask it with jokes. I would cover it up with comedy and being goofy and silly. That would make people think that I was just being sarcastic or not to take me serious. And pretending that you're happy all the time and then joking around all the time, people tend to think that you're a pretty happy-go-lucky person with very few worries. And this was something that I was doing a lot of during my, I want to say, middle school years and up, because I was in school every single day. You know that your teachers are like mandatory reporters. So if you do or say something around them that makes them like suspicious, like my guidance counselor, they're going to refer you. They're going to investigate your household. Something's going to happen where everybody in your household is going to get kind of dismantled from their usual routines. And my sister and I, we had a huge fear of foster care at that time. So we did not want anything like that happening. So for a long time while I was still living with my mother, I masked a lot of these feelings by pretending that I was happy, pretending that nothing was wrong, and this is the thing, it wasn't that I was unhappy in general, it was that I would be severely stressed by things that I hadn't yet processed from our past, because of my sister and my mother and I were not openly talking about these things to work these feelings away and to work away the traumas that were affecting us. It was almost like we were pretending it never happened, kind of. I felt bad for my mother as well, because I knew that she was struggling with some kind of mental issues, based on the fact that she was considered disabled after she had this bout where she went to the mental institution for a little while, or I should say the mental ward, not the institution, but the mental ward. She had a nervous breakdown. So like after this breakdown, she got evaluated. She got diagnosed with something. I still don't, to this day, I don't know what the diagnosis is. So I knew that she was struggling mentally. My father had recently died, and she was a new widow trying to navigate everything by herself. And she was a foreigner, so it was difficult for her with the language barrier, and I had to kind of be like her translator. So there were a lot of things that my mother was relying on myself and my sister for to help her to raise us. So just surviving every single day, you know. So I didn't want to stress my mom out by having teachers and authority figures looming over us, pressuring her to do more than what she was already doing, because I feel like she thought at the time that she was doing her best. And I beg to differ, but again, with the tools that she had at her disposal, maybe that was her best. At this point in our lives, my mom's personality had started to change a lot. She was becoming more irritable and very violent. Like, I don't mean violent physically, like she beat us. She wasn't that kind of violent. She had an explosive temper. So if you said the wrong thing and you kind of didn't always know what the wrong thing was until after you said it, she would just explode. It wasn't like, let's talk about it, we're disagreeing, now we're arguing, and this gradual explosion to anger. Like, I didn't want to stress my mother out further by showing my emotions. Another thing I would do is I would channel all of my sadness and bad feelings into art. So for me, I'm a performing artist. I always have been. I would write music, I would write songs, I would write poetry, I would write like scenes from like a play, or, you know, short stories. I did a lot of writing, a lot of just like categorizing things. It wasn't for necessarily to perform it, but if I had some occasion to do a performance, this was the catalog of things that I was choosing from to perform. And when I'm expressing it in an art form, I feel like I'm getting it off my chest without everyone being in my business and like knowing that it's me. For example, if I was having triggering thoughts about like sexual abuse, I would turn it into a poem, and then my character in the poem would be expressing the thoughts and feelings that I was having that I couldn't just say were my own feelings. It was easier for me to mask my true feelings that way because I had tons of poems that were based in complete fiction. They didn't have anything to do with me. They weren't even based on anything that had ever happened to me. They were just social issues or things from my imagination that I was putting into poetry form. So if you really didn't know my life story, if you read all the books of poetry I had, even if you were reading my business, you would never know it because you're not gonna put two and two together if you don't have a reason to. Another thing I would do is avoid social situations that I couldn't control, I guess. I also had Asperger's. So a lot of the things that people who have Asperger's naturally do look like the kinds of things that people who have depression and anxiety do. And they may not have had any trauma in their life to go along with the behavior. So it's tricky because if you are someone who have Asperger's who also has traumas, some of these things, it's like, are you doing it because of your autism or are you doing it because you have trauma? Which one is it? And I feel like it happens to varying degrees depending on the person. So I was also dealing with some of the symptoms from my Asperger's, which is over stimulation, like sensory overload. I would go through that and I didn't know how to express that to people because I knew it was weird. I knew it was not like common and it sounded like stuff I was just making up. Like I would get like headaches and stomach aches for no apparent reason. I didn't eat anything bad. It would just be this is the thing about like depression and anxiety. Some of the things that your subconscious mind is trying to like process and figure out, it's so overwhelming that when your subconscious is in distress, it'll start to tell you through your body. So you'll start to have ailments that have no explanation, like no reason, no trigger for why you're feeling the physical symptoms you're feeling, but you'll still feel them. And I think that is your subconscious that's trying to warn you, hey, I'm stressed, like let's slow down, right? All of this led to me eventually just getting in such a depressive stupor that I was stuck in my bed. I couldn't get out of bed. And my mother, like sometimes she will get involved and try to correct things or help you with stuff that really aren't that big a deal to you. Like she thinks it's life and death, but to you it's not really that big a deal and you can figure it out on your own. Whereas things that you actually need your parent for and you actually want them to notice that you're not right, those kinds of things, she'll just brush them off. Like that's just how she is. So of course, no surprise, she wasn't really doing that much to like encourage me to get out of bed and go to school. I felt like, well, as long as no one's gonna push me, I'm just gonna lay here and not do anything. And that's what I did. The only times I did get up and actually go do stuff was later in the day after the school day would be over, probably around like 5 o'clock and on. Like I never did my homework. Guys, don't ask me how I passed school because I really don't know. I think I'm just a smart person and I do well on tests because I'm a good guesser. I use logic to figure things out. And most of the crap we learn in school, it's like, it's common sense. You don't really need to learn that shit. Like we don't really use it in real life. So a lot of times when I would be like bored, when we'd get textbooks from school, I would just read ahead. I would read all the stories in the English books that we used to get. Remember those big, thick English textbooks we used to have? I would just go through the whole book, read the entire thing in like 2 days, read all the questions that were in the back of each story where they're like, oh, let's review. And they ask all these stupid ass questions at the end to make sure you were paying attention. If I could answer all the questions in my mind, I would know I'm prepared for whatever else the teacher's gonna assign us, because it's not gonna be more in depth than whatever the textbook is telling us. And I would just remember that stuff. That's how I got through a lot of my schooling. The only thing I couldn't bullshit my way through was chemistry, which I failed miserably. So it doesn't work all the time, but that's how I did it. Yeah, so after school and then after French homework, because that's like the only homework I actually did, French and Spanish, I would go record music at a studio. So I always had friends that were either, they had their own studios or they were producers that worked with people that had studios. So they would have a studio to bring me to. So I would just go and work on my music. But again, this was my outlet. This was my way of getting some of this out of my system. And so going to the studio didn't seem that daunting a task for me because the way I would feel afterwards was so worth it. Like I felt like a therapy session afterwards. That was about the only thing that I did actually participate in when I was going through that. But what I had to do was I ended up having to change my schedule at school so that my earliest classes started at like 12 so that there was enough space in my morning for me to like get myself together and mentally prepare to go on with my school day. Like in my town in New York, they used to have teen parties at our community centers on the weekends. So all the kids that were under a certain age in the community could just come and like while out. It was like a $2 admission, maybe $5 if it was a really special party. But there were a lot of community events. But unless I was performing in the event, if it was just to go there and like mingle and be around my peers, oh hell no. Like that was like fear factor number one for me at that time. My social anxiety would just completely take over and I would avoid it at all costs. The only times that I would attend was when I was forced to, because my mother wouldn't let me and my sister do anything unless the other one was with us. So my sister, who didn't have these problems, she was completely a social butterfly. She did everything all the other kids did. She had so many friends and like she would want to go to these events and go dance and have fun, but I hated it, and then when I would go there, sometimes the smells would just give me a massive headache. Like I could smell each person's individual perfume. I could smell in the air, just in the air. I could smell everybody's body odor, everyone's breath. Like it was so extra, like it was too much, and there's nothing I can do to mask it or like avoid it. And then I would feel like cramped inside of this gymnasium full of kids, full of bodies, and like it's dark in here and there's lights flashing and music is blaring. I can't hear my thoughts. And then I was always feeling like nervous if my sister wasn't right next to me, because she was my security blanket for a lot of years. If she would go off with her friends to go dance and go like get drinks and have fun, I would get so nervous on the inside. Like I would feel like I was going to break down and cry, and I would have to hold it in and like try to think about something else, or try to like keep my eyes on her while I was like sitting on the bleachers or something, follow her around the room with my eyes to make sure I never lost sight of her, because I would freak out if I felt like I was by myself in this place. I feel like when you look back at those times, like the people who were around me when we were having these interactions probably thought that I was just part of the group, like chilling with them. I was just quiet or something. But no, I was terrified. Like I could not deal with it. To me, that was like being stuck in a horror movie. Like I had to get the fuck out of there. I wasn't like that when it came to like church functions, because I knew everyone at our church and I was familiar with them, and I had a leadership role with them, with like the youth that I mingled with. So most of the kids in my church at that time were younger than me. And we had like a club that we had created and I was like the founder of the club. So I was like the president, and then everyone else had their ranks. So this was my way of dealing with all these kids that were just constantly jumping in my face trying to get my attention. I don't know why, but people who are younger than me are like they gravitate towards me. They're so attracted to me, and I don't know why, but it's always been like that. Most of the people that pursue me are like much younger than I am, but they're annoying. Like they get on my freaking nerves. So like all the people I want to chill with are older than me. So that was my way of managing all these personalities, by creating this club, and then that way I can control the interactions people are having with me, and I'm running the show. If I'm leading, then I'm okay, but if I have to follow what someone else is doing, I can't deal with it, because I don't know the plan. I don't know what are we trying to accomplish here. Like I need to know the end goal. If I don't know what the goal is, I cannot function here. It makes me very nervous. And it was worse back then. Nowadays, it's not as bad. But I never made any real friends. And this is not something I necessarily did on purpose, but it just kind of ends up being that way. And this is also a combination of some of the other issues that I deal with that cause me to not make friends who I consider my real friends. I have like a handful of people who I consider actual real friends, and some of them are related to me, so I don't know if that even counts. For years, it was my sister, although there was a span of time where me and my sister had a falling out, so that kind of like changed the dynamic of our relationship. I feel like it's not as tight as it was when we were younger, and it could get there, but I feel like it would really only go back to the way that it was if we were physically around each other, because a lot of our relationship was built on affection. Like me and my sister, even though we fought every single day, it's almost like the fighting got negated because we were so affectionate with each other. We would walk around outside holding hands. We always slept in the same bed. We were very huggy with each other, very cuddly with each other. She constantly like She was like my personal hairstylist, so she was always touching my head, touching my hair, experimenting with my hair, and like that trust that we would give each other back and forth, taking care of each other's kids. But that level of affection creates a bond that is you can't compare that to just words, just having a verbal interaction with one another. So now, because we live so far away from each other and it's not an option to just visit one another whenever we want, it's not the same, you know? So if we never had a falling out and I had just moved far away, then our relationship would still be the same. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, so for a long time it was my sister. She was like number one on my list of close friends. And then my uncle Benny, but he always got me and I always could be myself with him. And my husband Adonis, my cousin Sharia, and damn, that's really like, that's all family members. For a little while, it was my friend Jesse from high school as well. He was one of my best friends. Even though I spent a lot of time with my exes, I don't consider those guys, I never felt like they were my best friends, even when we were dating, because I wasn't always being myself with them. I felt I had to mask and suppress a lot of who I really am because they don't get me. They're not that smart. Like, they're smart, but they're not as smart as I am. So I always had to dumb myself down with them. Otherwise, their emotional problems would get in the way of our interacting with each other. Like, why is that even an insecurity of yours? If you're in a relationship, why do you think you're in competition with the person who's your mate? That's ridiculous. But that's how insecure some of my exes were. I didn't have that many close friends. And the reason why is because when you're trying to mask your depression and suppress a lot of these feelings that are happening, you feel like you're going to burden people when they find out that you have these issues that you're dealing with. So even though on a surface level, you would think your friends are supposed to console you and try to like help you out, give you an ear that can, listen to what you're saying, a shoulder to cry on. This is what you see on TV. But in real life, when you're dealing with people and you see how people react when you start talking about some of this stuff, the cringiness of the people's reaction makes you fall back and makes you say, that's not the reaction I was going for. So maybe I should avoid this topic. So you just don't talk about that stuff. So even though, like, again, I was going to church, I had a therapist, I had all these people that were supposedly resources, I never felt comfortable talking to any of those people about my true feelings because I always felt that they're judging me in such a way that they're like trying to figure out ways to distance themselves from me. So even though I don't care what they think of me, I do care if our relationship breaks down, and I don't want that. So let me just keep it to myself. And that's what I did. Yeah, so I didn't end up having a lot of friends who I would consider like lifelong friends or really trustworthy friends or people I could feel like I can rely on for emotional support. This part is a little R-rated, but it's the truth, and this channel is meant for adults. So one of the major things that would be my way of like masking my depression when I was a lot older, when I was in my like 20s, I feel was promiscuity. And I felt like being able to, like, you know how they say sometimes people who are depressed, they'll like self-medicate by doing drugs, drinking alcohol, and engaging in like destructive behaviors like gambling, stuff like that. I didn't have those kinds of vices. My way of, I guess, doing that same thing, getting the same result, was by being promiscuous. And I was able to compartmentalize my feelings from physical activities so easily, without even thinking about it, almost like automatically I was able to do this. It was to the point where I would tell the guys that I would meet with beforehand, I'd be like, this is just a one-nighter, and if you start thinking, oh, I want her to be my girlfriend, don't do it to yourself. Just erase my number out of your phone, because I'm not going to answer the phone for you. I'm not going to answer your text messages if you are bothering me with love notes. Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want a boyfriend. I don't want to be nobody's girlfriend. Like, just leave me alone with that. This is just what it is. So sign the contract. If you're okay with that, then we'll proceed. If that bothers you, then fuck off. And the crazy thing is, you would think like the average dude would be like, oh, that's a dream come true. Let's get to this, right? No, it was like I had the opposite effect for some reason. I don't know why. But afterwards, my phone would just be blown up by all these guys trying to like continue seeing me. And I didn't mind the physical part of continuing to see them, of course. But as soon as they would start talking like, well, I'm going to take you out on a date. Oh, if you were my girl. Oh my God. I would just be like, yeah, I'm not interested, and just erase all their numbers. But that's how I preferred it, because I didn't want to get close to people. I felt like I have all these issues I need to work out for my own. The act of being promiscuous with these random people, to me, was distracting. It was distracting me from my feelings and I don't like being sad. I don't like crying. I don't like feeling stressed out. So, and like, who does, right? But I mean, it causes anxieties, and I didn't like those feelings. So in order to hide the feelings from myself, it was just easier to mask it by almost like filling up my free time with guys. I'm giving you guys these examples to illustrate that sometimes when you're hiding negative things about yourself, you're not always hiding them from other people. Some of the examples I gave show that I was trying to mask my negative feelings from others, but then if you break down some of my other examples, you'll see that nobody else was judging me except myself. Nobody else would even know that I'm doing these things to hide my true feelings except myself. And that's the thing. Sometimes you're hiding from yourself. Sometimes you don't want to accept the truth about yourself. Sometimes you don't want to believe that another problem, I'm done with problems. Like, how many problems am I going to have to work through to have a regular life? I just want to be a normal person. That's difficult to come to terms with when you're just exhausted emotionally, dealing with so many traumas, abuse. And like, while this stuff is going on, mind you guys, that my mom, like I said about her explosive temper, imagine being in a fight or flight response all the time, like every single day, without a break, constantly. Every day you come home and you're preparing yourself to have to argue, defend yourself, literally get into a fight every single day, or avoid it, flee it, run away from it, get away from it so that you don't have to deal with that. This was the state of mind that me and I think my sister was for a very long time after we got away from the domestic violence situation with my dad, and then the stalking and molestation situation with my mother's ex-boyfriend at that time. My mom herself, I think, was going through a lot of stuff. I mean, I know she was, but the bottom line is she was taking it out on us, and that took its toll on us because we're still children at the end of the day. We're in our teens. We're just starting to bud into like some adult freedoms, and we didn't really know how to like process a lot of this stuff. It wasn't as simple as just getting help. Like, what does that even mean? What happens when you start to hide your depression is that everything becomes suppressed. So it's like it's stuck in this pressure cooker, and you think if you keep stuffing it further and further down, you keep adding more horrible emotions to the stuff, horrible memories to the stuff, and keep the lid on tight, you tell yourself it's going to disintegrate, it's going to evaporate, it's going to disappear at some point on its own. But that is not the truth. What happens is it starts to seep out of the corners, of the cracks of your personality. It starts to eat away at you until you cannot function as a regular person anymore. So the best thing to do is to try to express this stuff more if you can. And also, you don't have to necessarily go to other people if that doesn't make you feel comfortable, but you should try to face them to yourself at least. Start there. If I can accept that I do truly have depression and possibly anxiety, and it's triggered by certain things from my past that I haven't worked through, instead of getting scared about what's going to happen if I face the truth, it doesn't help anything. And then by the time that you're ready to work your problems out, because eventually you're going to have to if you want to live a normal life, you're going to have so much stuff that you have to work through that it's going to be like heart-wrenching trying to figure out how to navigate through all these feelings and a mess of emotions that you have. Like, it's so much more work you end up having to do, so many more broken relationships you end up having to mend or lose, so many people in your life that you're just missing out on because the fears from the depression and the anxiety start taking over everything. You're not truly suppressing it. It's actually creeping up as a shadow, looming over you, and like your subconscious is still trying to let all this stuff out. So even if you're not consciously doing it, it's coming out. And then now you're just in a situation where you have all this mess to clean up. So if you can avoid doing those things, if you're watching this now and you're like, some of this stuff sounds like things I do. If you feel like that, then take that as a warning to start working on some of this stuff and stop running from your emotions. How do you do that? How do you stop running from your emotions when That's all you know. Like I said, some of the stuff that I was going through, I didn't even know that I was going through it. But that's why videos like this and channels that are catering towards this type of information, I feel like are such a huge help. Now we have the internet to garnish information that we don't necessarily have access to. So because we have these resources, I feel like people have less of an excuse to just wallow in their pity. You are someone who knows someone that sounds like they're going through some of these things. If you're picking up on things that your friends or family members are doing that sounds similar to what I was doing, I advise not to take that lightly and maybe share this video with those people. Throw it up on your Facebook. You don't have to tag them. Just put it up there and they'll watch. It's a useful tool when you run into other people who are suffering the same stuff you're going through, who have had similar situations and made it out. Those people can be such an inspiration and help to you, even if you don't know them personally, even if you're not talking to them personally, just knowing and being aware of those people and them sharing their stories. You might be able to get something out of it that can help you to figure out what you need to do to better your situation. So I will work on some videos talking more about how I got myself kind of out of these habits, how I recognize these things about myself to even help myself. But step one, I mean, you're halfway there. This is part of it. You have to be able to hear the symptoms. You have to be able to hear the signs and then realize that pertains to me. Be completely honest and truthful about yourself. One of the things that I struggled with mental health was that anytime someone with some kind of authority in the medical field would question me about my psychological issues, I would lie. I would tell them the answer that I thought they wanted to hear, or the answer that I thought is acceptable for you to not get thrown into a mental institution in a straitjacket. So all these misconceptions you have from watching too much TV and like bad horror stories, that's what I did. So I thought that if I just tell them what sounds like is normal for a person of my age group who is walking the walk of life that I am, then they'll leave me alone and they'll think everything's cool. You have to make a decision within yourself that your sanity and your chance of survival and living normal is worth fighting for that. It's worth dealing with some negative, ugly things in order to get that end result. Once I figured that out about myself, then I was able to slowly peel these layers off of my onion. You know, self-awareness is such a huge tool, and this is why I always say when people tell you don't self-diagnose, bullshit. You should self-diagnose. I don't think you should self-diagnose and then go run off to try to get all these benefits. Like, there's people that do that have like Munchausen's or Munchausen by proxy, and they're just constantly pretending they're sick or something's wrong with them, or even making themselves ill to get attention from people. That's a completely different situation. You have to self-diagnose to a degree so that you can accept that you have an issue. Like, do you need to go to the doctor to find out you're morbidly obese? When you start gaining so much weight that you cannot function daily activities like everybody else does, you should be concerned. This should be like a red flag. You should look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey man, this has gone beyond just not being cute, can't fit into my clothes. I'm unhealthy. I'm sick. I have to stop being obese. I have to figure out how to reverse this and take your health into consideration. And when it's physical health, people have an easier time doing this. But when it's mental health, people run from the idea of diagnosing their issues. I don't need a doctor to tell me I need to lose weight. I know I need to lose weight because my body is telling me I need to lose weight. And for a long time, this was another thing I would do actually. I would mask a lot of my sad feelings with food. I was a binge eater, like way too much food, eating disorder status, too much food. You don't need this much food. In one sitting, I would just eat so much food. And like at that time, my metabolism was so high that it was burning the calories fast enough that it didn't show on the outside until like after I had kids. But that habit of continuing to eat that way stuck with me. So I still overeat, you know, and that's like a constant struggle that I have trying to manage my weight. I didn't even take my weight gain that serious until I found out I had diabetes, high blood pressure, like all these health problems, and then other health problems that I have that I wasn't even diagnosed with. Just because I know my body is like in distress because it can't handle the weight that I have, since naturally I'm a very skinny person. So many ways that your life can be affected by this stuff that just stems from something as simple as a trauma or some abusive situation that caused the depression or the anxiety. And we don't want to be like that. We don't want to live like that. We don't want our past to determine our entire future in a negative manner. And these things do have these effects on you. You do have a higher likelihood of having medical problems when you come from families that were causing you childhood trauma. So, you know, if you know these things as an adult or even as a young person, don't take it lightly. Take yourself and your life seriously and try to do something about it, even if it's just baby steps. Every day, try to do one thing that's going to help you to get better mentally, get into a better place, you know? Again, like I said, you use this platform as a way to vent. If you need to express yourself in the comments, go ahead and express yourself. Whatever that method is, you gotta find it and you gotta do it. If you just stay inside your own head, it'll just keep getting worse. I hope this video helps somebody. Go ahead and leave me a comment or a request if you have a question, something you want me to cover in a video coming up. And I will talk to you guys soon, hopefully. And thank you so much for joining us today. If you're new here, I hope that you will subscribe. If not, then just go ahead and bookmark this page in some way that you'll remember to come back to it, because I do have so much more stuff planned. And so, I mean, no topic is taboo here, you guys. So you can ask me whatever you want. I'm not a sensitive person, and I'm a very open person, so I don't mind talking about whatever. So that's all for me. Again, I'm Gypsy, and you can follow me on Instagram. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and check out my backstory series. Yeah, it's a series that's in the making. Yeah, so just go ahead and check that out so that you can understand some of the stuff a little bit better that I'm referring to when I talk about my childhood and stuff like that. I don't want to repeat all of that stuff because it's so much. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on Anxiety. Yeah. And sorry guys, I'm so distracted. You see, this is my Asperger's. I'm distracted by this thing on my lip. Just like an allergic reaction to something. That happens to me, but I never know what it is that I'm having the reaction to. Like, it gets on my freaking nerves. Sometimes it's on my face, sometimes it's like on my nose. My whole nose will just swell up. I feel like I'm not looking at my own face. Anyway.